Did you know that how we interact in our adult romantic relationships is often based on how we interacted with our caregivers when we were children? So, how we interacted with our parents or grandparents or whoever was our primary caregiver. What we believe and how we behave in romantic relationships are often reflections of what we were taught or how we were raised as children. These are often referred to as our attachment style. Now, there are four types of attachment styles that we all fall in. Today, we're taking a look at what anxious attachment is. As a therapist who works primarily with females, this is something that I see a lot in my office and I hear about a lot when it comes to social media. So today we are addressing what is anxious attachment, what are some of the causes, what are some of the signs, and more importantly, we're going to address how to work through that and how to be a partner to somebody who maybe struggles with an anxious attachment. So let's dive on in. So, what are some signs of somebody who is struggling with an anxious attachment? There are going to be three common signs that somebody is struggling with an anxious attachment. Sign number one is going to be low self-esteem. They feel like the person that they're in a relationship with is far superior than they are. So feelings of low self-esteem and low self-worth are very common with somebody who's struggling with an anxious attachment. Sign number two is needing constant reassurance. And this can look like endless calls or texts and needing to know why the person's in relationship with them. This can come off really clingy. And oftentimes the root of this need is out of fear. The fear of they're going to leave me, they're going to cheat on me, the fear of I will suddenly not be good enough and I have to do everything I can to make sure that I keep them. And then common sign number three is going to be a fixation on the relationship. So much so though where it's unhealthy. Now, obviously when we start dating, it's fun. We want to spend all our time with the person that we're in relationship with. That's completely normal. But this is the idea where there's almost an obsession with the relationship. Again, it's out of fear of if I don't put everything I have into this relationship to an unhealthy amount, then they're going to leave me. And when there's such an unhealthy fixation on the relationship, again, it can create a spiral because there's an obsession and there's this fear of they're going to leave me. So those are going to be some of the common signs of somebody who's struggling with an anxious attachment. Now, are there causes, are there reasons that people can become anxiously attached? Yes. Let's dive into those. So there are going to, again, be three main reasons that somebody can become anxiously attached. Two out of the three are actually, again, due to childhood and what they were taught and how they were raised in childhood. As I mentioned in the intro, they are often based on our relationship with our parents or our caregivers or whoever took care of us growing up. So cause number one can actually be due to overprotective or highly anxious parents themselves. Sometimes parents who struggle with anxiety that's so paralyzing will often and accidentally and unintentionally pour that anxiety into their own kids, where the kids will start to question everything: why, when, what. And so much so, though, they become untrusting of everything and everyone. So parents who become overprotected, often known as a helicopter parent, or parents who keep their kids so closed off to the world, out of a good place, can actually turn into an anxious attachment. Because what will happen when they grow into adults, they will keep that mindset that they had as a kid to question everything to an unhealthy degree, where they can become so anxiously attached in their romantic relationships that it becomes overwhelming. Common cause number two is going to be growing up in stressful or traumatic situations and environments. When kids grow up in an environment that's stressful and traumatic in the sense of they never know when their parent is going to show up, they never know when their parent's all in and when they're all out, that can create an anxious attachment as an adult. You see, growing up with parents, when it's good, it's real good, and then when it's bad, it's bad. That can create a lot of confusion and anxiety. And then common cause number three can actually be due to previous unhealthy relationships that you may have found yourself in. When we find ourselves in unhealthy relationships and maybe we haven't fully healed or recognized how unhealthy they were, especially with people who tend to be emotionally abusive. When we have those types of relationships and we go into new relationships, again, we carry the belief and behavior from past relationship into new relationship, especially if we haven't taken the time to address the unhealthiness and the toxicity that we are coming out of. And we can be in a new and seemingly healthy relationship, but if we haven't worked through the unhealthiness and the toll that our past relationship took, it's going to create an anxious attachment in our new relationship. Okay, now that we've addressed what anxious attachment is, let's take a moment and talk about how to deal with it, or how to cope, or how to work through it. So before we talk about how to cope or how to possibly work through anxious attachment, let's talk about some of the common triggers of somebody who's anxiously attached when they're in a relationship. Number one, when their partner starts to withdraw or starts to communicate less frequently without any kind of explanation. And when somebody who's struggling with an anxious attachment starts to feel that their partner is withdrawing, or they're starting to communicate less, or they're starting to feel more distant, that can trigger even more anxiety and an unhealthy spiral. Trigger number two is going to be ghosting. This is something that I've seen where my clients will be in relationships and their person just ghosts them out of nowhere. And it literally makes them feel like they've done something so wrong or that they're going crazy. Lack of communication and ghosting is a huge trigger for somebody who struggles with an anxious attachment. Number three, and this may sound silly or minute or like, why does this even matter? But it matters, and that is forgetting important dates. So birthdays, anniversaries, or special moments that may seem silly to you, but they are big for your partner. It can communicate to somebody who's anxiously attached, or really just anyone in general, but especially somebody who deals with anxious attachment, that you don't care enough or it wasn't important enough to remember certain dates or special moments. And then last but not least, when it comes to big triggers for somebody who struggles with an anxious attachment, it's gonna be constant arguments. Now again, in relationships, any good healthy relationship, you're gonna have conflict, you're gonna have moments of arguing, that's okay. But when it's constant arguments, somebody who's anxiously attached is already in their head enough of, I'm doing something wrong, I have to do better, I have to be better to make them stay. But when there's constant arguments happening, it can trigger or even inflame, we'll say, the anxious thought of, I'm not doing enough, something's wrong with me, I have to do better. And so when there's constant conflict and constant arguments, again, that is a huge trigger for somebody who's struggling with an anxious attachment. How do we work through it? How does somebody who struggles with an anxious attachment when they're in a relationship, how do we work through it? Well, there's gonna be two main ways. Number one, couples therapy. I know that might sound silly. It's like, well, we're not in crisis. Sometimes when you're in relationship with somebody who's struggling with anxious attachment, it's good for you to be equipped with the tools on how to communicate, how to be a better partner or a healthier partner in certain situations. And it's important for the person who's struggling with anxious attachment to see that you are wanting to come with them to talk things through and to learn better techniques, coping skills, and mechanisms. And then the second thing that can be extremely helpful for somebody who's struggling with an anxious attachment is going to be individual therapy. I know it's a financial investment. I know it takes time and it requires a lot. When it comes to anxious attachment, though, there's a lot of mindset and behavior that needs to be rewired and undone. And when it comes to therapy, that's going to be the best place to find it. You're going to want to look for somebody who specializes in things like cognitive behavior therapy, where you are literally unlearning and relearning patterns of thinking that's going to impact your behavior and how you interact in relationships. So how can we be a good partner if we are in a relationship with somebody who is struggling with anxious attachment? Well, there are a few thoughts here. Number one, setting some healthy and sticking to some healthy boundaries, whether they be mental, emotional, physical boundaries. But it's important to help regulate some things when you're in a relationship with somebody who is struggling with anxious attachment. So a boundary could look like, hey, we're going to talk this many times throughout the week if you're dating, or hey, no more than this many texts. And really sticking to those healthy boundaries will help regulate and communicate to the person you're in a relationship with that we are in this together, while also understanding we have to have healthy understanding of expectation and boundaries. Thought number two, and this is something that is really important no matter who you're in a relationship with, but especially for somebody who is struggling with anxious attachment. Say what you mean and mean what you say, and be consistent in that. Oftentimes, again, when somebody is struggling with anxious attachment, one of their biggest fears is somebody's going to say one thing and then do another. And that fear comes from past experience, whether it was past relationship or whether it was due to upbringing. Inconsistency in a child can create such anxiety all throughout childhood and even into adulthood. So learning to help change that narrative for them by saying what you mean and mean what you say and being consistent in that can be a huge thing for somebody who's struggling with anxious attachment. Thought number 3 on how to be a healthy partner for somebody who's struggling with anxious attachment is go to therapy with them or encourage therapy for them. Something I always remind my clients, and I even remind myself, is we don't have to wait for crisis to happen to be in therapy. Therapy can help avoid crisis. And so encouraging the person you're in relationship with to go to counseling, but maybe for the first couple of times you go with them and you encourage them and say, hey, I am in this with you. I am here with you. I'm not abandoning you. And then last but not least is learning how to show your partner that you care without them asking or requesting it. One of the things that we talked about earlier was how there needs to be constant reassurance from the person who is struggling with anxious attachment. But if we can learn how to be proactive in that, if we can learn to let them know verbally, hey, I am so thankful for you. Hey, I appreciate what you did. Or hey, I am so thankful for the time and effort you put into this. That can be a game changer. Also, physically showing them, whether it's taking them out on dates without them asking or prodding, whether it's, doing something spontaneous. It doesn't have to be expensive, it doesn't have to be often, but it has to be intentional. If you show them that you care, if you show them that you're all in and that you are present without them asking or requesting that, again, that will start to help shift and reshape that narrative in their head that they have to ask and beg for attention or for affirmation. But if we give it freely, that can be a huge blessing to somebody who struggles with anxious attachment. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. I hope you feel more encouraged, enlightened, and empowered in understanding what anxious attachment actually is, and hopefully some ways on how to work through it and the best way and healthiest way to be in relationship with somebody who may struggle with it. As always, I want to remind you guys, if you're interested in all things mental health, therapy, faith, pop culture, then this may be the space for you. I would love for you to go ahead, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, and turn on your notifications. That way you're notified when brand new videos are out and available for you to watch. Be sure to tune in next week for more mental and emotional health tips, tricks, and information. Until next time, guys.